Good morning and welcome to the new edition of my live comments. Just at the end of the week, an event took place which was supposed to be a stock taking for self, a sort of an analysis of the self. And here the self was the Liberal Party. And this annual Jamboree, the convention, possibly the last convention before the major elections to be held next year, should have been a time of stock taking of the successes and the failures. And if the failures, why they were there. But as it is, instead of casting about appropriate lights and shadows over the first 2.5 years of the mandate of the Liberal Party to govern, this convention, like a typical convention, was more of a fan club, resolutely optimistic, excessively fawning, absolutely myopic and blind, and characterized by a power of uncritical thinking. The whole thing was sought to be justification of the actions of the government, notwithstanding the fact that what the Prime Minister described himself as not being perfect. The reality is the first term failures put him a long way away from perfect. And unfortunately, this is possibly the first time that the personal being, the persona of the leader of the opposition was ridiculed by no one other than the Prime Minister. The whole convention was marked by Trudeau's attack on Scheer, where he said it may be Andrew Scheer's smile, but it's still Stephen Harper's party. This speech would have possibly been quite a good campaign-style speech. But it was not the speech of a trendsetter, the speech of the party leader who promises the sunny ways. And unfortunately, the whole thing started right from the beginning. The party is dipping and slowing in the polls. More and more people are annoyed or angry, and there is still a clawing, self-congratulatory haze over the proceedings. The pose was epitomized by Bill Morneau recounting his cab ride story when he says that the driver recognized him, and he reminded the audience it happens so often, and asked him if he could call his wife, presumably wanted to tell his wife, the cab driver, that he was a fortunate person to have the honest finance minister in the back seat. Morneau agreed. The cabbie put the wife on the phone. She asked, why are you calling? And then he said, well, why don't you thank the finance minister for the money he has put in our pockets with his tax politics? A very cheap sort of a story, especially when concerning the government, which is marked by financial scandals like that of Finance Minister Morneau himself, in making use of the inside information to sell his stocks and shares. His $200 million real estate in Paris, which he kept hidden, and the Prime Ministers and the other ministers gala entertaining and leading a luxurious life, either at Aga Khan's place or in using the limousines. Regular people, you see, don't care about Morneau's aversion to blind trust. But this Prime Minister has set up a record of deficits. And that is the stuff of negative oppositions and pesky journalists. But let's be very clear that the whole conversation that was in the party involving the Prime Minister's sidekick, Gerald Butts, and Obamacare turned CNN pundit, David Axelrod. Now, the whole of Democratic Party in USA is concerned over the intervention of the Russians. And one word which is resounding all the time is that that contribution may not be in cash but is in kind. Now, wasn't the advice of David Axelrod a contribution in kind and an interference in the democratic process of Canada? And what did they do? They talked, and the all talk was full of ego trip. There were stories of that they had risen from the humble roots. But the whole thing was, to say the least, nauseating. And in reality, just a joke. The whole talk had nothing to do with the policy matters. I was expecting that the convention would take some policy decision, because the purpose of such a convention is always that these mushy exercises are taken to celebrate progressive politics. But this was nothing like the family reunion of the Liberal Party to consider where they have failed. It was not even a shadow of the Oxford Debating Society. Had that been there, maybe some sense could have been there. And why do the Liberals feel the need to talk to this American pundit at a Canadian political convention? It's anybody's guess. Well, it would be as bad as if Scheer was to invite Steve Bannon. Incidentally, Butts also called Steve Bannon, which he refused. That was intellectual diarrhea. And despite all this hot air about the Prime Minister's crowd being a team, nothing could be further from truth. The party worships of Justin Trudeau, that's true. And they will die with him. Justin is as diligent as any one of them. But there are definitely some things to boast about. Probably the most difficult piece of legislation passed by the government in 2.5 years is to pass the bill authorizing you to die with dignity. That is the only thing they have done. They have, of course, definitely improved Canada Pension Plan and the child tax credit. That benefits a lot of Canadians. But is that sufficient? They have broken the promises, all the promises that they made, and that calls for a deep apology. But that apology is very common to Justin Trudeau. He will apologize for anything. He apologized for Komagata Maru, though that was done according to the law of the land. He apologized for the ignoble sexual exploitation of Native Indian women. He apologized about the residential school scandal. But apology without rectifying steps has no meaning. And the whole process of governing for the last 2.5 years is nothing but a bumbling fashion of work that was a fashion shoot Trudeau made of his trip in India. And he said, when he said, I'm not perfect. Not being perfect does not mean behaving in the undiplomatic manner in India. Not perfect does not mean showing your socks to Angela Merkel. Not being perfect does not mean hugging the London mayor while no other prime minister of the 53 countries assembled in Chogam talked to Khan at all. Not perfect does not explain the self-indulgence of holidays on the private island of Aga Khan. Not being perfect is a long way from being perfidious. Where's the personally promised electoral reform offered during 2015 elections? That was it. And Trudeau has said, that's my personal agreement. My personal promise to you, I'll do it. And he didn't do it. So that is dishonesty. Trudeau broke his promise, all the promises, that the Harper-era environment assessment technologies would be replaced by valid scientific approvals or there'll be no federal permits. Instead, what happened? He issued permit for British Columbia's side sea dam, which had been plagued by another landslide, and also this notorious, infamous trans-mountain pipeline expansion. There is no assessment at all. Yes, he used science, but the science he used was political science for the votes. The Prime Minister has openly contradicted his passionate commitment to fighting the politics of fear and division by forming these things, Kinder Morgan's dubious pipeline through British Columbia. Where is the commitment to fighting the politics of fear? He threatened the premiers to do it. He did this by teaming up with Alberta and the National Business Lobby and forced British Columbia government to agree to the concept, which was absolutely bold. And that, what's going to happen, the transportation of obnoxious substances would be across the land and the waterways. First Nation leaders are worried because it's they who are going to suffer. But the watch of the government, when it came to that relationship, was supposed to be reconciliation. And all these actions are absolutely antithetical to the concept of reconciliation. Despite the promise of Justin Trudeau, despite the obligation that we have under the Constitution of Canada, despite the fact that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People have always been violated by Canada, where would be the firing line on Burnaby? That's the point that we have got to face. It will be the First Nations and the protectors of the First Nations that they will face the RCMP or army if they stand firm against mountain pipeline expansion. Trudeau has very clearly stated that he will go through it even if he has to use the army and RCMP to mow down the opposition. Is that democratic? Is that as per the Constitution? Because that land is not Canada's land, that is a Native Indian land, the First Nations land. That against the United Nations Protocol on the indigenous people. So what are we celebrating? The promises made in 2015 have all not been fulfilled, except one, as I told you, dying with dignity. The government has been a flop on the reform of all access to freedom. Do you know that 900 days of Trudeau regime and still there is not a hint of a promised change? Even today, the charity organizations have to wonder, is the charity status intact or not? Can you believe what is happening? And after a recent meeting the finance minister had with the NGOs, one of the NGO CEOs remarked, I think Prime Minister Harper is still in charge, they do not have the courage, they stand for the Liberal Party, to undo what Mr. Harper has done because they know in the heart of their hearts that that was the proper action to be taken. And then Justin Trudeau had said that we will get rid of subsidies to the big oil. All those subsidies are still in place. However, fortunately for Liberals, the Prime Minister was dead right on one thing. When he said that the Conservative Party only has a cosmetic change with a change of the leader, yes, Conservative Party is still a party of the Harper, but that goes in favor of conservatives, that there will not be a break with the tradition and the values. On the left, NDP could challenge the progressive supremacy. And I was amazed, I was just going through Bible, and I remembered one line of Bible, that if your heart goes to the left, then you are a rascal. And if it goes to the right, you're in the proper place. So maybe Justin Trudeau is proving that their inclinations to the left are symptomatic of their attitude. Liberals can neutralize Jagmeet and his party on the policy of pharmacare. But the Halifax Convention is a long way towards the granting the universal pharmacare. And what I think is now that 2019 election platform will see pharmacare to be the central plank of Justin Trudeau. It's something different. They will not fulfill the promise as usual. But as weak as Trudeau is, he keeps statements that match the right words and the wrong action. And he has built this habit. The environmental community is critical because despite all the promises and all the support of the Paris Accord, despite all his rhetoric, he has been more of a petro-politician than Harper, as a matter of fact. Not even Harper would impose a bitumen-bearing pipeline on a province that opposed it the way Justin Trudeau has done. And this comes when the government's target is to exceed the emission cuts agreed by 200 megatons a year. And here we'll be increasing it. As I said, zero scientific knowledge. Our study was done. How diluted bitumen could spill and cause havoc in the open seas. It's a clear at enmity with a promise to have scientific-based policy. But don't worry, he has taken one action, and that is that the flame at the parliament will no longer be using natural gas. They are searching for a more eco-friendly energy source. Wow, what an achievement. I wish our leaders were more realistic, more careful, and more dedicated. I wish that at least they live up to what they promise, the promises they make, rather than make them and break them or ignore them. But therein lies a tragedy. Thank you.